For over 20 years, Howard Mann has transformed the lives of entrepreneurs by helping them bring their businesses back to life. But Howard didn't always have a clear perspective on business, whether it be his own or his clients. In the early 2000s, his logistics business was showing signs of decline, and thin margins plus a recession were turning the business into a loss-making problem, despite the $140 million in turnover. In this episode, I talked to Howard about ego, mental health, and his entrepreneurial wasted years, among many other insightful topics. I quote Howard on a weekly basis, and his first book, Your Business Brickyard, is a favorite of mine. My name is Nick Haralambis, and I don't want to keep you waiting any longer, so remember, it's not over until it's over. All right, Howard, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the show. And I'm going to dive right in by asking you to set the scene. What business are we here to talk about today? When was this, and how did it kind of inform the rest of your life?
So this goes back a ways. I was running a mid-sized international logistics business, which I like to explain to people that we were travel agents for cargo.
Nice.
We had about 150 employees in the U.S. Across 6 offices, and 35, 40 agents around the world that were our partners. And in the late 90s, it went through some very hard times during a couple of recessions ago in the late 90s, when our competitors were sort of started to feed on each other, which happens in a recession. People start diving for business, and we were a service business. So we charged a fee for coordinating a shipment coming in or out of the United States and arranging for its delivery. We didn't own any trucks, planes, warehouses. We just coordinated everything, hence the travel agent analogy.
Okay.
And I went through 3 very lonely, very stressful, very fraught years as the business shrunk, the revenue shrunk, and battled all the way back to a point where we could sell it. And in January of 2000, we sold it to a larger competitor, not as some incredible entrepreneurial glory moment, but as a way to get out of it and for me to sort of get on with my life.
Okay. So I want to go into a bit more of the detail. Since it is so distant, I'm hoping you'll be comfortable giving us some numbers. So just prior to that 3-year dip that you were talking about, and we'll talk about that in more detail, how was the business doing in terms of revenue and profit?
The business did very well. It was it's a little misleading because there's a lot of numbers thrown in there, but it was about $140 to $150 million revenue business, doing $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 worth of profit. It really at its core was maybe a $12 million gross profit business, and the tricky part about the business is that the margins were very, very thin. Always were very, very thin. The industry is an industry where the margins are very thin, and when anything bad happens in a thin margin business, the difference between profit and loss is small and quick, and so that is something that has stuck with me for years about the value of not having large profit margins for greed, but having it as a bigger safety net when there's shocks to the industry, when there's shocks to an economy. Thin margins really make you go from above water to underwater very, very quickly.
That's great. What comes to mind is that very popular saying at the moment, when people are trying to disenfranchise the middleman, that your margins are my opportunity. And that's true when the margins are this big. It's not so true when you're Amazon and their defensible business model is 0% margin. Like,
right.
It's insane and smart. Okay, so the business, I mean, it's so funny when you say mid-size for many, many, many business owners around the world, 140 million in revenue is massive, not mid-sized. I mean, to give you context, I'm an ex-South African entrepreneur. I'm now based in London, and in South Africa, $140 million is nearly 2 billion rand. Like
Right.
the
But
context there was huge.
it's interesting because there's context here in terms of what I always thought our biggest issue was looking back on it
Mm,
is within the context of our market and our competitors, there were the huge competitors at the top of the market, the UPSs and FedExes, and to some
mm,
extent back then DHL and things like that. And then there were a lot of very small, what we would say, a mom and pop, but a small 10-person office.
mm,
And looking back on it, I always felt that we were too small to be big, and too big to be small. So we were caught in a place where we had a lot of costs that couldn't get rid of, a lot of payroll, and the bigger guys could always outprice us, and the little guys could also outprice us because if they were desperate, they would just do it forever, and their overhead was tiny. And
mm.
so it was an interesting place to be sort of squeezed in the middle. And in the context of that industry, we were in this sort of mid-range, a nice business in good times and a business that is saddled with a ton of costs in hard times.
Yeah. Okay, and so I'm interested in just the practical understanding of what a client would go through to work with you. So they would get in touch with you and say, "We've got something we want to import. Can you handle it for us?" Will you walk me through that just so I have a better understanding of exactly
Yeah.
what your
So
role was?
it was never a one-off. It was a business to business type of sale
Okay.
where, because in the United States, and this is true most areas in the world, you need a sort of a representative to represent you to U.S. Customs
Hmm.
to basically fill out a tax return for a shipment. And they can be, depending on the goods, they can be very, very complicated. And it sets up how much duty and tax is due for those goods that the importer has to pay for. And to do it wrong is the equivalent of messing up your tax return. It doesn't work out well for you.
Mm.
So they would entrust us with a power of attorney to be their representative to U.S. Customs. And that was usually, the bigger the client, the longer the sale, where they would then entrust us, okay, you are our customs broker in the United States. And so take a client that I won once, which was Beck's Beer. They entrusted us with that. We handled every shipment that came in for
Wow.
Beck's Beer, cleared it through customs, and arranged to be delivered to a distribution center or whatever it was. And so you have a good relationship. It's a fiduciary relationship, and you had to create you had to get through for them to effectively fire whoever they were using before and
Mm.
decide to use you for reasons that you had to convince them about.
Okay, so that I'm glad I asked for that explanation because that helps me then frame how could that go bad. I mean, you've locked in B2B customers. It's like getting SAP software into a company. Once you're in, and moving off, the opportunity cost is just so massive. So talk me through now the start of that 3-year decline, what surrounded it, and how you ended up there.
So when recessions hit, this has happened with clients of mine since then. So it's this cycle is that everybody then starts to look for where they can save money, and they start with the biggest number first, and sort of it almost feels like they're working their way down a list. And
Mm.
at some point, they landed on us as a cost, and they would then put the business out to bid. And in a recessionary environment where FedEx and UPS have trucks and planes that are empty, they were starting to give our service away for free so that they could get freight into their trucks and planes, and would offer them with their cash balances of being public companies, they would offer them 60, 90-day terms to pay, which would be crippling to us. And even if clients would come to us and say, "We love you guys, but hand us the quote and say, what am I supposed to do? I mean, it's half your price. It's in some cases, it was a tenth of our price. And in a lot of cases, we would just say, okay, and we cut our fee and match it or come close, and they would stay with us. But
Mm.
if the margin was thin before, now it's almost non-existent.
And then it's a
And
race to the bottom.
you get into this survival mode of we have to do whatever we have to do to keep it. I was a lot younger and had not as much experience to figure out what was worth saying yes to and no to. I think we then got on a big kick of how do we cut our costs to try to keep track of it. And it's a double race to the bottom.
Okay. And when this all started happening, I mean, was there a definitive client? Was there a moment, or was it like this general movement towards cost cutting and cutting you out? Like, do you remember the visceral time?
Well, the sort of a trigger point was one of our biggest clients was Michelin Tire Company. And they moved from New York, where our headquarters were, and we had worked with them forever, and they moved to South Carolina and felt rightly or wrongly that they should probably have somebody local to represent them. And so we fought for that business and lost it. And so that was a large hit, unrelated to anything. And then the rest was death by a thousand cuts. It was one client at a time coming to us and saying, we got this quote, or our business is really struggling. Your fee costs us this much per year. Can you do something for us? Candidly, I think that I became very, very good about trying to save the client and to cut our costs, and did not focus as much as I should have on going out and getting new business and figuring out a way for us to claim someplace in the market that wasn't so time sensitive. And in fact, the way that we brought the business back was by getting out of more commodity type businesses.
Can you unpack that for me?
So I actually, when times got really, really bad, I reached out to somebody I trusted and asked for a referral to, oddly enough, a turnaround consultant, which was sort of the inspiration for me doing a lot of the work that I do.
Yeah.
And he asked me some really important questions around the clients that love us. Why do they, and don't argue about fees? What's the common theme? And the common theme was that the goods that they imported were either time sensitive or very high value, so that the service mattered more to them than the price. And so that sparked a suggestion about, okay, what industries ship high value and time sensitive goods where they don't care about the price, but it better be there when it's supposed to be there. And that led us down an interesting path of, I acquired a small company that was in the fine art transport business. So that filled that thing. We then acquired a small company in California that did transportation for the film and entertainment industry. So we moved the goods for movie sets that they're going to film Jurassic Park in Hawaii. We shipped everything there, shipped everything back. They could care less about. And just to give you an order of magnitude, the profit margins went from our normal 6% to 35%. We then acquired a small company in San Francisco that shipped classic automobiles. Somebody buys a car at an auction, or they're going to race it in Giro d'Italia. We would handle the whole thing. Nobody cares what the service fee is, but it better be there and it better have its wheels intact and no dents on it. And so that really started to help us of having some focus around not we're all things to all people, but if you care about service, if you have something that's time sensitive or of very high value, then we're really the only people you should be talking to. If you are, and there's many, importing goods where 5 cents or 10 cents or $1 makes a difference to your sales price, you should go use somebody else, which is hard for any business person to turn business away. But finding that line and getting a better understanding of who we are, why people should use us, and what we were as a company, which was always one that was very, very sensitive to our service level, where the FedExes and UPSs are massive machines that can just turn the crank and process 1 million shipments in a night. That was super helpful in making me feel like, okay, we have some control over our destiny now. We're not just trying to push back the ocean.
There's a few things I want to unpack there. Just in our so far short conversation, the theme that has come up twice kind of is being everything to everyone. First, you mentioned you were too big to be small and too small to be big, which means you're kind of wavering in the middle. And then mentioning, going niche is a good thing, actually, when you started getting rid of all the fluff and cutting out all the clients. And it's such a difficult thing to actually turn around to your team who've been selling to those clients, to the clients themselves, and actually going, hold on, you just don't fit with us anymore. So was there some pain in that process of shifting from everything to everybody to this specific thing? And okay, what happens next?
Right. There's definitely pain. I think everybody, even my clients now, this idea of turning away business or even firing a client is massively, massively difficult. But there is, once you set on a strategy, it's critically important to say, okay, in order for me to get to the other side here, I'm going to have to go through some pain. I'm choosing to go through this pain to come out the other side. Because I know that even though I know this pain, even though this pain has become comfortable for me, it's not sustainable. And I now sort of in my brain these sort of 3 steps, which is don't lie about who you are, find the awesome in what you do, and then, and only then, be relentless building some momentum around it. And so the first key piece is that don't lie about who you are. There was an old joke in our industry that if you ask a custom broker, what is 2 plus 2, they'll say, what would you like it to be? And this idea of what you just tell us what you want to do, we'll tell you that we'll do it, just please hire us. And that has to go in order for you to have a business that has identity, that is able to walk into a sales call and say, this is who we are. This is who we should care. Also, from even targeting who your client should be, we used to have this book there was a giant book that was published every year of all the importers in the United States. It is 4-inch thick book in tiny, tiny print with, and everybody in theory, everybody in that book, when our original business model, everybody in that book could be a client. And when we decided this is who we are and this is who we serve best, that list got a lot easier. Now we're looking for precious metals. Now we're looking for people who are shipping $10,000 blouses in high fashion. Now we're looking for people who are in industries that make sense. And you can quickly say, this is somebody who should be working with us. And we just have to tell them that we're here. As opposed to, I know 25 people call you every week, but we're the ones you should like. And then what does that conversation come down to? Price only.
Yep, and then you're screwed. And I've been saying this for a while, and it's something that is very hard to understand when you're starting a business and trying to gain traction. But niche doesn't mean small. Niche means specific. And it's so important to understand a specific customer, because there's, like you said, a 4-inch thick book with tiny writing. If you niche down, you've still got thousands of customers, but now they're the right customer. And it's such an important lesson to learn, and it's such a difficult one to learn on the job.
No, and when we had it, that was our Bible. We would just hand this book to our new salespeople and say, call whoever you like. Call whoever you like. Look at all these people. How could you not win when you have all these people?
Okay, quickly, I want to talk about your team and the key players in the business now at this point. So you got 150, give or take, employees. You've got a management team. You've got a board. I imagine you've got all these formal things, and the wheels are starting to fall off. So how do the people around you start responding? Is there panic? How's your leadership style? Like all of these EQ things I'm interested in, because a lot of founders struggle with that because you are in this tornado as a human, never mind the people around you.
Rightly or wrong. So we're a private company, so no board.
Okay.
But I had a really great management team and I had a very good relationship with, became friends with them, I think, in some way. And I would admit that rightly or wrongly, my choice was to keep it to myself as much as I could. I think they felt some stress, but they didn't see what was happening to the bottom line. They would just see that we changed our prices. We'd win some business, but we were winning it at lower margins. And I mostly kept it to myself. And didn't do good things for my social life, didn't do things for my psyche or my sleep. But I just felt that as loyal as people may be, if they feel that the ship is sinking, that they will look to see what other ships are out there that they might jump to. And the one thing that I didn't want to add to all of it was a talent drain. People have a lot of good client relationships in that industry. They leave and they take a couple of clients that they're friendly with them. So I basically kept it to myself as best I could.
And do you think that was the right decision, looking back on it?
I do. I think there's other ways that I could have done it. I think that rather than soldiering it alone, I think there could have been a way. And if I was doing it again, which is an evil game that I still 25 years later still play with myself, I would have sat down with everybody. It's just to take a step back a second. Looking back on it, we would have survived much better and actually probably thrived had I shrunk us down from 6 offices to just the 2 that were making the bulk of our money. The 80-20 rule applied to 20% of our offices were making 80% of our revenue and profit. And the other offices were really there for ego and pride. And the thinking at the time was, what would our competitors think if they saw us shrink from 6 offices to 2? And I am a big proponent of stop caring what your competitors think, because they're not paying your bills and they never will. And in hindsight, we could have become small and nimble. We could have become this boutique, cool agency for people with high value goods and time sensitive goods that had 2 offices that made a ton of money. And my income would have gone way up, and it would have been easier to manage. And the only thing that blocked me from that was my ego and my pride.
How old were you at the time?
This all happened from when I was 29 to when I was 33. So I was
Yeah.
young, full of
ego
vigor,
years.
Fire, ready to take on the world, thought I had every answer to every problem. I knew best, and I could just out hustle and out that whole hustle and grind thing and all of that. And so to go back to the original question, if I had sat down with our team and said, this is the situation, but rather than, okay, let's panic, look what happens if we shrink down to 2 offices. Look what it means for all of us. Look at what we'll create. Who cares what our competitors say, because we're just going to do our own thing. Mm-hmm. I would have been able to present to them a path to more prosperity and opportunity for them, as opposed to, oh my God, things are going really bad. I'm not sure how we're going to fix it. And that was how I saw that playing out at the time, and how I thought that things would end with them saying, that's great, love you, Howard, but peace. I got family, I got bills to pay, I'll see you.
Yeah. And at this time, who was helping you, like advising you on these decisions? You mentioned you brought in a turnaround expert, but outside of that, did you have mentors, advisors, friends, colleagues? Like, who was helping you, or were you alone every night dealing with this?
So I was a member since I was in maybe 28 of an organization called YPO, which is the Young Presidents Organization. And I had what as part of being in the YPO chapter, there's also EO, which is Entrepreneurs Organization, which is a similar structure, where I had a monthly private board of directors, so to speak, of, I think we were about 10 other members that we would meet under strict confidentiality once a month. And you grow very close to these people. They became some of my closest friends, and I could talk to them about it without any worry about it leaking out, or and there were people that I trusted who all owned businesses of similar sizes to me, and who knew me for years. So that was a very, very big help during that time. And then I had this turnaround consultant who also became a good friend and a very trusted counselor. I needed somebody who would just call me out on my bullshit and who would tell it to me straight. And I told him that from our first call. I didn't want somebody who was just going to tell me to buy low and sell high, or vice versa. And to tell me when I was lying to myself, or what, tell me what I needed to hear. And so he was immensely helpful in just holding a mirror up and saying, you keep telling me this office is going to do better, or this thing is going to happen, and that's going to happen, and it's not happening. So what are we doing?
Very interesting. And how did your team react to bringing in a turnaround consultant?
He was a super interesting guy. I think they actually liked it. He sat with each of them individually as part of the first part of his process, and he was very energizing and very motivating guy. And so I was always, when he came the first day and sat down with each of them came out of that meeting sort of energized and recharged. I think it created some sense of, I've done this for 40 years. You guys are not in the, I remember our first conversation. He's like, you have all your fingers and toes? And he said, then we'll figure this out. And so I think he brought some sense of, you guys are not in the kind of shape that I usually walk into when there's 30 days left. We'll figure this out. And sort of challenging each of them, are you doing all you can do to really help? How do you feel you could help? And it sort of re-energized everybody a little bit. So it was helpful, even if difficult for me to eventually admit that I needed some help and that I couldn't do it all myself. When I finally did, that's when everything started to change.
That's exactly what my next question was going to be, is how bad did it get before your ego allowed you to ask for help and bring someone in to actually kind of do what you should be doing at that time?
Horrible. I've said this before. I lost my smile. I was somebody who was always upbeat and smile and whatever, and I had lost my smile. The weekends were torture for me. This is in the ages before email in any major way, before a lot of people had cell phones that weren't just strapped to their car. So you had an entire weekend where I was helpless, of not being able to be in the battle, of nothing to do except wait for Monday morning.
That is a crazy thing. That is a crazy thing. Like, we take it for granted now that, emails can fire and you can solve problems all day. Back in the day, Friday comes, everybody goes home, you wait till Monday.
Over. I couldn't wait till Monday morning where I could get in and start making phone calls and do anything. The whole weekend was just sort of as if, that, like the robot that like goes and sits and powers down in the corner. That was me, just sitting there waiting to get back in the battle on Monday morning. And there's nothing you can do about it. There's nobody to reach out to. There's nobody to email. I mean, we were still getting faxes, most of the time. So it wasn't as conducive to feeling that you're at least in action. And it took to be until I was really, really down and despondent in some ways, that nothing seemed to be working. And I don't know what caused me to...
Like a year or two after this started that you got the consultant?
I would say a good 2 to 3 years before I felt defeated that I felt that I should reach out and ask for help. And at that particular dynamic is something that I have thought about, because it's something that I see with my clients over the last 22 years. And the same question that I ask myself, why does it take people so long? Why do they have to endure so much pain before they will raise their hand and ask for help? Why is asking for help seen as such a weakness? I mean, you see it now with there's such a focus on mental health, and that it's not a stigma, and it's not bad to ask for help. It's not bad to talk to a therapist. It's not bad to reach out and tell people that you care about that you're struggling. 20 some odd years ago, it's even more unheard of. So it is, I always question why I wish that I did it sooner. Why didn't I do it sooner? I think the biggest regret was not saying, I don't have all the answers here. I don't like how things are going. I should have somebody to talk to. I need to tell somebody what's going on and get somebody else's perspective, because I'm like I say in my book, that it's hard to read the label from inside the bottle, that this sort of being trapped in a hurricane is very hard to make decisions. It's very hard to get some clear perspective because every decision is emotional. This was my business. There was no separation between if the business was going bad, my life was going bad. If business was bad, I was bad. So there has to be some way to get somebody who says, hang on, there's you, Howard, as the person. Not that I'm talking about myself like a third person or something. I hate that. But
I think it's kind of cool. You do it.
And then there's the business and how do you get some separation to be able to look at the business objectively and say, who cares? Is this going to make me look bad if we shrink? Is it going to make me look bad if the business goes away? Or is it just, this is a business that needs to be and when I go in to sit with clients, I think half the battle is that I'm not emotionally connected to the business. That each decision,
to the outcome of that sale.
Yeah. That each decision that gets made doesn't make me feel like I am a failure personally and that I have failed and that each decision is going to hurt me. And to have someone, not to be cold about it, but to break somebody out of the fact that their psyche and their sense of self are completely intertwined with their business and its rise or fall.
Yep, there's so much there that I resonate with. Firstly, I quote you almost weekly on You Can't Read the Label from Inside Your Own Bottle, and I reference you too. Secondly, if you're listening to this and you haven't bought Howard's book, you absolutely should. Your Business Brickyard, I think it's called.
Your Business Brickyard, right.
I'm a fan. I read it, loved it. And you have a podcast. I'm not sure if you're still pushing those out, but go find that. We'll link it in the show notes. But I think the things that I want to highlight there is your self-worth cannot be pegged to the successful outcome of your business. Those things are separate. And I've been building businesses since I was 16. So I have self-identified as an entrepreneur for as long as I can remember. My formative years were I'm an entrepreneur. And for the last 2 years, I haven't been building a business. My identity has been broken for 2 years. I've been trying to rebuild. Who are you without a team, without staff, without profit, without growth? And It's overwhelming and it's scary. And the second thing is it's important for us as business owners to understand that this narrative of good businesses only go up, they only grow, is absolutely batshit crazy. Good businesses weather the storm. They understand that things go bad. They understand that profits might not be there every month, every year, every quarter. I hate this concept of growth for the sake of growth. And it is this tech revolution that's come around that has made us believe that the only kind of growth is 10% compounding per day, every day. That's just not the way it works. Like if we sell that narrative to founders, they're going to feel like failures all the time.
You know, it's funny, and I don't mean this as a shameless plug, but I'm about to launch a new book, and it's the core thesis is right around this because it's around figuring out what is enough for you. That there is this in an entrepreneur space and even in business that you are either growing or you're dying. I think that's, like people say that all the time, and I have said to clients, would you want to have a $50 million business that makes $1 million in profit or a $4 million business that makes $3 million in profit? And that seems like a simple question. It isn't. Plenty of entrepreneurs want the $50 million business. They want the $60 million business.
Yeah.
And if you take my old business, did I like saying we have $150 million revenue? It's a bit of a fake of a number. It's a puff your chest out kind of number. Mm-hmm. But would I have wanted to shrink down to having a $6 million business that made $2 million in profit and that was off the radar? Nobody knew about it except for the people that needed to know about it. And we all had a good time working there, and I made a really nice life, and my stress level went from a 90 to a 60. And who was I trying to please?
Yep. This question, it plagues me. And I think having been building businesses for as long as you have, not as long as you have, but long enough, It's kind of an age thing. In my 20s, I wanted bigger head count, top line revenue. And as I've gotten older, I want, like you've said, to slide under the radar, have significant profit, and have nobody bother me. I want to have the freedom to say no to clients that piss me off. Like, that's the kind of business you want. But it's a very hard thing to do when you're in the bottle and you can't read your label and the bottle is on fire around you. It's really hard.
It is, but there's also this current narrative that business is supposed to be hard. You are supposed to suffer for a certain number of years to get to where you want to get to. Yeah. And in retrospect, that was all wrong. Yeah. I tell the story at the start of my book about this, that somebody asked me to go meet a couple who was planning on retiring and wanted to sell their business in an industry that had passed them by, and their business was worth zero. They couldn't sell it. So they had spent their whole life toiling away, working in the hopes that someday they would sell their business and get retirement. And that day never came. So how many years, how many decades do you want to sacrifice under this idea of hustle and grind, and you're supposed to be suffering for this someday that may never come? Mm-hmm. How many businesses tried to build themselves up and then stuff out of their control, a housing crash, COVID, shutting down? How many restaurants built up their whole empire? How many gym franchises built up their own franchises only to be told that you have to shut your business down? That if you haven't figured out, wait a minute, life is short, not in any sort of, we're all going to start to meditate in a minute, but in I should enjoy this journey. Are there going to be moments that are hard? Absolutely. Are there going to be trying times in your business? Absolutely. But if I don't have some level of enjoying the journey and enjoying the ride, I've made a huge mistake. I'm going to waste decades with a business that could fail for reasons that have nothing to do with me. And I have to start over again. And this idea of growth just for the sake of growth. There's this great quote by Ricardo Semler who says there are only two things that grow for the sake of growth: businesses and tumors. And that's that's good. This idea of we just have to grow. We have to grow 20% this year, and then on January 1st, we're going to do it all over again and try to add another 20%, is not looking at the bigger picture of strategy. It's not looking at the bigger arc of life. It's not giving you the opportunity to say, where do I actually want to go? What kind of life, not how do I want to give my life to the business, but what kind of life do I want the business to give to me? Do I want 10 houses and a private jet? Then okay, then go for hyper growth. Do I want to, if you stop and figure out, what do I want the business to give to my life? What kind of life do I want the business to give to me? If we're going to own a business, if we're going to be in charge and be an entrepreneur in the way that I like to think about an entrepreneur, which is I own and operate a business that is going to create a life for me and the people who care about my business, and going to do some good in the world in some way, or be an expression of our craft, whatever that may be, whether you're an accountant, a lawyer, or you're making art, then I have to stop and figure out what is my enough, and how do I model my business and create my business so that it gives me the life that I want. Because then the way that we feel about our business is very different. This business now is not something that is sucking the life out of me, but is something that is giving me the life that I want, and is a way for me to play, and is giving me the freedom that I get from owning it. There is a risk-reward piece to owning a business that is meant to be that all this risk is going to turn into some windfall reward. Instead of, the reward could be, I get to take 2 months off every year, or I get to travel the world, or I get this beautiful house on the beach that I always wanted to have. And I get to have it all the way through my journey, not just only if I sort of scratch and claw and make it to the finish line. And I think that conversation is not had enough. It's more of, did you see the Instagram guys who have 12 people and they got sold for $1 billion, or this guy who raised this money, or these guys who, got to $50 million in revenue? Those are, trying to be a unicorn is not, for most people, is not a fulfilling journey. And yet that's what people are reading about and emulating. That's what an entrepreneur has become.
Yep, it is.
I feel like I should say thank you for coming to my TED Talk at the end of that. But
no, I mean,
that's...
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's kind of the point of why I'm speaking with people like you, because I've had similar experiences throughout my entire life. It's this unspoken thing. There's a couple of things here. The first is I don't have kids, but every person I meet is like, oh, you should have kids. It's the best thing in the world. But then you have kids and those same people are like, jokes, I haven't slept in 6 years. It's horrible. Screw you. And it's very similar being an entrepreneur. Every entrepreneur will say to you, it's the best thing. You own your time. You're your own boss. You make tons of money. It's amazing. You go on holiday whenever you want. And then when you start your own business, they commiserate and they're like, ha, sucker, come join me when we don't sleep, we don't eat properly, we don't exercise, we don't get holidays, we don't get weekends, we don't pay ourselves a salary, and there isn't any profit. And this is kind of the thing that we think as entrepreneurs is this beautiful joy of owning your business. And we mock salaried employees that they're waiting for retirement. We're doing the same thing, waiting for the big payday. And then it doesn't come. And then what do? You're unemployable. You have no big payday. You need to go and get a job and you can't have a boss. It's a big thing. So your TED Talk, as much as it was brief on this podcast, was relevant. And I think that your book is going to be perfectly timed because the great resignation we're seeing around the world is coming with these sort of reflections on, well, what is success to me? What do I want out of life? Do I want a business with 1,000 headcount? I hate the word headcount. It makes people things instead of humans. And I think it's a relevant conversation. But I want to take... It is. And
go ahead. There's just to pick up on what you said, there's when you're in that moment of saying, I'm going to start a business because I want to have time off and I want to, like, those thoughts are not, that is not usually built into the business plan. It's not built into the strategic ideas of the business. It's this wish that's going to come someday. But if people sat down and said, hang on, if I parked my business to the side and I said, what kind of life do I want to have? Now, what do I need to do with my business to have that life? It will force decisions that may go against this idea of growth at all costs, but it may allow you to create a business that fuels your life.
100%. I mean, just that simple reframe. Imagine putting into your VC's pitch deck that you want more free time, a bigger salary, and you want to take a vacation a month every year. They'd be like, no, thank you, moving on. And that's great because that means you're not a VC business and you should never build a VC-backed business. You should build a sustainable, profitable enterprise, which a zebra startup instead of a unicorn startup. Like, that's the idea. So I want to jump back to you're now in this, you're 3 years deep, things have gone badly. How does this affect your personal life? Do you have a wife and kids at this point? What are your friends doing? Like, how does this feel day to day for that period?
I was single at the time. I could not date. I mean, I'd try, but my mind was preoccupied. Mm-hmm. I was forever jumping on an airplane to go put out a fire somewhere. And I could not, I was, and even when I would hang out with my friends, I wasn't a lot of fun to be around. And almost the only thing that I could find myself to talk about was my business woes. And there was no way that I could figure out about how to separate it and to have a personal life. It wasn't only until after we sold the business in January of 2000 that I actually was able to take the time to decompress, to sort of reset. And that is when I actually wound up, I'm surely not coincidentally, wound up meeting somebody and getting married and starting a family. But that was 2 years later of me just trying to make sense of everything that had happened and what I wanted to do with the rest of my life.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I imagine your mental health took a huge dive, and back then it wasn't really a conversation you had with people, this mental health thing.
No, and also, you know, I'm sure that I was depressed in some ways, and as probably anybody who's struggled with this, you don't, you know, all of a sudden wind up depressed. There was no one shock to the system that made me sad. It is this slow, gradual decline that is so gradual that you don't sort of realize that you are in a 100-foot pit until somebody tells you.
It
Right?
just
So it
becomes you, right?
took somebody saying, you know, saying to me, "You don't smile anymore." Like it took some sort of a jolt to me because I was Mr. Comedy and Mr. Jokes and Mr. This and that, and so for somebody to say that to me was a big bucket of cold water in my face.
Yeah.
That I had actually been on this descent that I didn't even realize. I just figured that I was just, this is what you do owning a business. You fight the fight, and you don't think about what it does to you. You just keep fighting the fight and hope that there's some end to this tunnel. And
Mm.
looking back on it, I mean, I can't imagine. I must have been the world's worst date if I ever went out on a date with anybody. I was mopey, and my mind was elsewhere, and all I wanted to do was just keep getting back into the fight, and had no way to separate any of it. And so, you know, the other side of that, and I think there's lots of people who could probably relate to this. I mean, I lost 4 or 5 very important years of my life to this, and you know, you have to come to some peace with not having regret, but but it's hard not to realize what it cost.
Yep. Yep. I know the feeling intimately. Um, so at the time when things were great, 140 million at your peak, and then the decline when you got in the turnaround consultant, how did the revenues drop? Half, 50%, 40%, 30%?
No, I think we probably went from probably 150 to 140 on the top line, but that little bump with thin margins, all of a sudden you're losing a couple of $100,000 a year, and
Wow.
that's not
Yeah.
sustainable when you know, that creates a hole somewhere. Even if cash flow can cover it up for a while, when there's a lot of cash floating around, it can sort of cover over it, but. We were able to get to the point by switching to these within 14, 15 months of sort of switching strategies.
Wow.
We were able to get back over break even, probably went from 150 to 140. But the fact that the margins increased is what made the difference. The fact that we were doing business at 35% margin instead of 6, 7, or 8, took the pressure off of, you could just do so much less and do it better than just being a factory. And that is what got us to that point. I ultimately didn't feel that it was so sustainable. We just had leases, long-term leases, and expenses in the business that made sense to sell. And I also, selling was sort of a way for me to just get my life back. I was 33. I had a lot of things I wanted to do. I felt a commitment to get the business to the point where it could be sold. And then I felt really strongly that I needed to go have a life.
Interesting. So it was very calculated. Turnover expert comes in. You guys niche down. You start to break even, get a little bit profit, increase the margins. You've got assets in your leases. And then at some point, did you consciously go, it's time to sell? Or was it like the consultant helping you do that? Like, how did you actually come to that decision that now's the time? Because releasing these businesses is the hard part for a lot of founders.
Yeah, it was a weird set of circumstances. One day I got a letter from, we had made, I say acquisitions, but they were basically sort of for $0, as we didn't have any to spend. We sort of brought these people into our business who were also struggling during the recession and gave them a cheaper home to operate in. And then one day I got a letter from a large investment bank that was offering a company for sale that is sort of the premier logistics company in the rock and roll and entertainment industry. Like if Metallica was going on tour, this is who moved them, right up our alley, right. And I only got that letter because people started to know that we were in this niche.
Amazing.
And when I looked at it, I thought, we don't have any money to do this. And for whatever, naive young youth reason, I said, okay, let's keep talking. And we wound up talking to them, agreeing on a price. I got along really well with the founder and their executive team. The fit was really, they had offices everywhere we did. There was all of this synergy stuff that people talk about. But now I needed to go find $2 million for the down payment. And so I embarked on this journey, bouncing around, sort of Goldilocks thing of going to private equity people and funds and asking for money with a balance sheet that was just almost laughable. But I just kept going. And somebody said, not for us, but you should talk to this person. Not for us, you should talk to this person. And somehow I stumbled into a fund that was exactly looking for deals of this size, somehow got comfortable with our balance sheet, believed in the plan that this would actually completely transform the company. If we had been able to pull this off, it would have made the leap to this completely boutique agency. And I just felt, if this doesn't come to pass, then we should sell. And so I had a very clear picture in my mind, because people had approached us to acquire us in this time. Everybody, there was a lot of acquisition going on and consolidation going on in the industry. And I said, we either do this deal and transform, or we'll sell and I'm out. And in the 11th and a half hour, the founder sort of had seller's remorse and decided they didn't want to sell. And the next day, I called somebody who had been interested in acquiring us. We had an offer sheet in 3 weeks, and we sold 5 months later.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, good on you for having the guts to stick to that decision, because it's a really difficult thing. I mean, I was in a similar position with the retail business that I had, that it's brutal. You attach your identity to this thing and you think you can save it. No matter what's going on, you think you've got the tools. You will make this work. When actually it's probably dead 3 years ago, and you should have walked away and, like you said, gotten your life back, because you're young and you've got opportunity and you've got ideas and you're good at whatever it is you're doing.
But I became an expert. I remember our CFO said to me one time, "You'd never seen anybody stretch a dollar or figure out." I mean, yes, we were dead probably 3 years earlier, and I came up with every kind of move and strategy to keep us alive that you could practically ever think of, and that became an expertise. Instead of growing the business, I just became good at how to keep the patient alive, and that's not sustainable. At some point, it's going to catch up with you, and I felt that if we did this deal, that I would have escaped it, and if we didn't, that it was about to catch up to the bank. Was getting very, very unhappy and unsettled. It's
always the bank,
putting a tremendous amount of pressure on us daily, screaming at me on the phone, and I had to give them something. I said, we're either going to do this deal, and then it'll take the pressure off, and if we're not, then we'll sell, and you'll get your money back, and stop yelling at me.
Please stop yelling at me.
Please stop yelling at me. I'm already in a fragile state. Please stop yelling at me.
Okay, so what do you think? I've just heard that you learned how to stretch a dollar, but what do you think that this experience taught you about how you wanted to go forward, what you wanted to build, and how you wanted to build those things?
I felt that I had a period of time where I was like, okay, that was awful. It seemed important to me to figure out that there had to be a point to going through that. Don't tell me that there was no point to this. And I started to reflect on, what did I learn? What do I wish that I knew? What was the point? Mm-hmm. And back in those days, this was 2001 or so, that blogging had just started. Mm. And through weird circumstance, I met Hugh MacLeod, who was very popular at the time with a blog called Gaping Void, and he started an email exchange with me about, what do you wish you knew? What do you? I was just looking for somebody to help me sort of think through my thoughts, and he kept pushing. I kept writing, because that's how I would do it back then, very corporate answers about strategy or this and that, and he kept pushing me, and then finally I got so frustrated, I just had like a screed of people don't know this, and business is this, blah, blah, blah. And he said, that's your first blog post. And I said, I don't want to have a blog just because it's the thing that everybody's doing.
Yeah.
And he said, don't do it for that. Just do it for yourself. Do it as a way to put your thoughts out there, just for you to process your thoughts in this open way. And who cares if anybody shows up? And it turned out people showed up because there were 20 blogs and we all got to know each other. Our mutual friend, Rich Mulholland, that's how we met, through the blog. That blog turned into my book in most ways. And it became a way for me to process to make some point out of going through that. And I ultimately landed on lots of business owners are suffering in silence and don't know what to do, who are stuck inside the bottle. And if I could come up with a way to help those business owners suffer less, to change their thinking, to read the label on the outside of the bottle, to beat the hell out of that analogy, that would be worthy work. And that would make those years worth something, that there was value in going through the trial by fire, and that I could take all of that and one by one, through book writing, turnaround work, coaching, advising, whatever it is that each business owner needed to hold that mirror up and to be that person who would lock elbows with them and get them out of this hole, that felt like worthy work. And it has been. I haven't had any desire to have employees again. I haven't had any desire to have a business that I couldn't adjust and pivot and switch on a dime because I had long leases or anything like that. I have been the interim CEO of companies from time to time, where I had some of that, but never wanted that for myself again. But have felt really good that there are a few dozen businesses that exist today and that are fulfilling to their owners because they asked for help, and that I was able to take all that I learned and all that I have worked on since then and bring it to them. And so that has brought me some peace around what those hard times were for.
I think that is a fantastic endeavor for any entrepreneur to be able to say that they've helped other businesses survive and ask for help. So in my final segue, to ask you to tell my listeners and viewers where they can find you. If you are an entrepreneur and you need help, don't be scared to ask for it. We've all been where you are. We've all suffered. I lost my hair because of it. This is the journey. This is the trip. So Howard, if people want to get in touch with you, ask you for help, or just get to know your writing, your blogs, your whatever, where can they find you?
Very simple. It's howardmann.com, Howard Mann with 2 N's. And I'm Howard Mann on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and whatever else you want to find. And on my website, there is a newsletter. You can actually get a PDF of my book when you join the newsletter, my first book. And the podcast is there, and links to all the socials is all there at howardmann.com.
Amazing. Howard, thank you for your time. This has been illuminating. I've learned so much, and I hope that people listening and watching have too.
Thanks for having me. It's always great to chat with you.